Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, transforming the way people think and work so their organizations can thrive. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Ed Kless, and with me today is Susan Markey. Susan represents clients in general corporate taxation and not-profit matters. She draws from a diverse background in government, accounting, and law to serve as a holistic business advisor and believes that legal advice should be both easy to understand and practical. Susan assists clients in a wide variety of tax issues, including tax controversies, audits, appeals, planning, and structuring, as well as researching tax law, drafting legal appeals, and memoranda. Susan also counsels clients on mergers and acquisitions, business formation, joint ventures, and general corporate matters while leveraging her background to help guide them toward profitable solutions. Welcome to the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast, Susan Markey.
Hi, Ed. Thanks so much for having me today.
Well, first off, Susan, why do you do what you do?
Well, so from my perspective, I love talking to smart, creative people about how they make their money. Entrepreneurs tend to be a little bit of kind of renegades, and it's the most fascinating thing in the world to sort of talk to people that had a vision and they created the vision and then they managed to make that vision profitable. So I'm not that interesting or free thinking. So I love interacting with people who were able to take their dream and realize it in that way. And it's really satisfying from my perspective to get to identify a need and fill it. So people call me because they're dealing with a problem and they say, I have this problem today, Susan, what do I do? And I get to suggest the solution, craft the solution, and then take that off of my client's plate. So for me, that's a lot of fun.
And we have an upcoming session with you under our Wednesday Wisdom series in which you're going to talk about the legislative changes to the Payroll Protection Program. I'm wondering if you could give us, maybe just hit some of the highlights. Can't obviously do the full session now, but maybe just give us some of a preview of what's coming up on that session.
Sure. So what I'm really excited to talk to your Sage subscribers about is the fact that we have the second draw aspect of the Payroll Protection Program now. So when I previously did the series for Sage, we were working on the first draw Payroll Protection Program loans. And now we're on the second draw. So businesses that are still struggling are able to get an additional loan if they've used the full amount of their first draw loan. And I'd really like to lay out the requirements for the second draw loan for the Sage subscribers so that they can use that information to benefit their businesses. It's the Paycheck Protection Program is unprecedented. There's nothing that's like this. It's as close to free money as you can possibly get. And it's really been an amazing program for business owners. So I feel privileged to talk about it.
I do recall talking to some accountants, not this time last year, but I think in the June-July timeframe, that they said if we could just stop issuing clarifications to the clarifications, that would be great.
That part of it, I will say, is extremely challenging because the SBA continues to issue these new rulings and frequently asked questions that completely change the interpretations. You know, all the commentators will agree. We think that this provision means one thing, and then the SBA comes out with something that sort of changes it, and it's almost retroactive in a way. So you're seeing a lot of activity around that now related to necessity. So there's been a lot of that in the news. You've seen that large companies have been really blasted for whether or not their loans were necessary. And you're seeing that the SBA is really putting a lot more attention around that. But it's extremely challenging for business people from my perspective, because the purpose of the program was to keep businesses operational and give them the chance to succeed. And now businesses that did not fail and did manage to remain operational and maybe even remain profitable are now sort of being punished or looked at a little bit more harshly because the SBA is saying, well, hey, you made money. Well, from my perspective, that was the whole purpose of the program, was to keep these businesses operational. So it's very interesting to see how the perspectives on the program change over time.
Yeah, that is challenging. Do we have any sense of some of these rulings as they've come out? I mean, I imagine that we haven't really even filed officially the returns in some cases that and the forms that are meant for this tax year. Is that correct?
Right. So many people are still actually waiting to know whether or not they will receive forgiveness or their forgiveness application is pending. And you're right, many people haven't filed tax returns yet. The other issue is that the SBA retains the ability to audit any SBA loan. So really, for the next 3 or so years, there's a potential that the SBA is going to start combing through these applications more closely and look back and say, oh, well, we don't agree with the necessity conclusion that we reached at the time. Now, what's frustrating for me about that is the necessity conclusion that we reached at the time was based on the SBA guidance that was available at the time and the information that was available at the time. So if you didn't know, say, Ed, if your business was closing or going under, it might have seemed quite reasonable to you at the time that this loan was necessary. But looking back on it, after 9 months later, when your business has bounced back and become very successful, it's very easy for the SBA to show up and say, well, it wasn't necessary because you then succeeded. And from my perspective, I think that that's really wrong, but we'll sort of see how this plays out over a long period of time.
Right. But sadly, it's not what you think. That matters, right?
Right.
It's what somebody...
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Unfortunately, the SBA does not care what Susan Markey thinks, but but it is very interesting to see how their perspective at first was everyone should apply that could possibly benefit from the loan. And then because they were working so hard to push the dollars out into the economy, which makes sense based on what was happening at the time. And now there's more appetite to look at it more closely and say, well, who really deserved it? There was a lot of controversy around, for example, publicly listed companies receiving PPP loans, which is now no longer permitted.
And it will be interesting because similar to taxation, a lot of folks think, well, let's go after these big companies with regard to taxation and make sure that they're paying, quote, their fair share, as we always hear. But they're the ones who are more likely to be in compliance, right? It's the smaller folks that,
right,
first of all, struggle with the compliance. But if you even look at, let's call it fraud, it happens more amongst the long tail of smaller taxpayers that either don't know the law properly or are trying to get away with something.
Right. And absolutely in this context, I can tell you, me being a corporate and tax lawyer, looking at the law and the SBA rulings and FAQs that were coming out every day, it was hard for me to keep up with the changes as this program was evolving. So, it's kind of unfair to expect that smaller, more entrepreneurial businesses are going to have the resources to stay on top of, well, the SBA said this qualifies yesterday, but now today they're saying this. So it is quite challenging for small businesses to sort of maintain a good handle on what's currently happening with these programs.
And Susan, we have an exit question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, who is a hero of yours and why are they a hero?
So generally, I would say through my travels and throughout my life, the people that I've admired the most are people that really want to make a better life for their children, even though they don't have a lot of resources with which to do so. And I've met people like that, in small villages in Peru. I could say that that's how my own grandmother was. She had 8 children and her husband died suddenly and she had to find a way to support those children. But there's that something about, it's such a common human experience to just have that tenacity and strength of belief in your children and the belief that your community will make the right place for your children, even if you don't have a lot of resources. And I really, really admire parents that sort of embody that and are able to give that to their children. And
lastly, Susan, how can our listeners contact you?
So the best way to contact me is really through email. And my email address is susan.markey, that's Markey, @Maslin, that's Maslon.com.
All right, Susan Markey, thanks so much for being a guest on the Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Review and subscribe by searching your podcast player of choice for Sage Thought Leadership Podcast.